Typically on the Sunday that we have fire communion, we don't have our usual joys and sorrows time because we're going to be lighting lots of candles later. So we're not going to light candles during joys and sorrows, but also because we need the time for fire communion. But I do feel led to say just a few brief words about the U.S. attack on Venezuela and the kidnapping of their president. This is adapted from a reflection from my colleague, the Reverend David Pyle. In moments like these, many of us sense that something fundamental has shifted with the world. I don't know if any of you felt that this headline felt a little weightier than even some of the huge headlines recently. I see some hands. We feel like something fundamental has shifted, even if we don't fully yet have the language for it. The news from Venezuela this week is one more moment that sharpens that feeling of unease. Not because it stands alone, but because it fits into a larger pattern that is becoming harder to ignore. For decades after World War II, the world aspired, however imperfectly, to a rules-based multilateral international order. It was a way of saying, what just happened in World War II, let's not let that happen again. So we established this rules-based international order. To be clear, it was never fair. It was never equal. We never fully lived up to those ideals of international law. And yet those shared norms mattered. They created at least some restraint, some sense that power should answer to something larger than itself. Increasingly, that era appears to be giving way to something else, a world defined less by shared rules and more by great powers asserting control over spheres of influence, testing limits, normalizing the domination of might makes right. There may be some dusty cobwebs in your head around this thing called the Monroe Doctrine that you may want to dust off that actually is frighteningly relevant again. This shift did not begin with Venezuela, nor with Ukraine. Sadly, I do not think it will end with Venezuela either. History reminds us that empires rarely announce themselves honestly. The United States is not announcing itself honestly as far as its intentions in Venezuela. And they almost never believe they are repeating old mistakes, even when they are clearly repeating old mistakes. They underestimate the cost of control. They overestimate their ability to manage complexity and discover too late that once a nation is pulled into the logic of domination, it becomes very hard to step back out. The tragedy is not only the suffering that follows the suffering that has already happened, but the ways that fear and pride slowly crowd out the imagination of the better world that is possible. So what does a liberal religious movement like ours offer to such a moment? Unitarian Universalism does not promise easy hope or quick resolutions, but it does insist on telling the truth about power, about human suffering, about our own complicity. It asks us to resist despair without surrendering to denial. It calls us to hold fast to human dignity even when the world seems to be organizing itself around force instead of cooperation. The world may indeed be changing faster than our institutions, our leaders, and our moral frameworks have caught up to, but our calling, as you used, remains to keep asking what it means to live with integrity in a time of great upheaval, to widen compassion rather than narrow it, and to remember that history is not only shaped by great powers, but also by ordinary people who refuse to let fear have the final word. So may we meet this moment not with naivete, but with courage, not with certainty, but with deep care for one another and the world, and not with resignation, but with a renewed commitment to the hard and sacred work of justice, of peace, and of our shared humanity around the world. I'm grateful, even in this hard time, to be on that journey with all of you. Most of us don't spend the day asking the question, what is the meaning of life? I mean, maybe some days. But most days it's coffee and then emails and then the to-do list, or maybe it's that mistake from yesterday that we wish we could undo that is what keeps consuming our consciousness. And yet underneath all of that, many of us are carrying a deeper question that we don't always name aloud. A question that tends to surface at moments of transition. At the start of a new year, after a loss, in the middle of a long night when sleep won't come. It's the question behind so many of our decisions, even when we don't realize it. What am I doing with my life? And is this actually the life that I want to be living? A little over a decade ago, 3 professors from Yale University decided to take such questions seriously. They created a course not about career success, not about technical mastery, but about some of the biggest questions that we human beings have ever asked. What matters most? What is a good life? What is the shape of a flourishing life? And what kind of life is worthy of our humanity? When you hear those questions, how do they land within you? Do they feel energizing, like you really want to answer them, or do they maybe feel unsettling? Can you even just feel a shift inside yourself? This wasn't a class about how to succeed by the world's usual measures. It was about what it means to succeed at being human. They called the course Life Worth Living, and students flocked to it. So many, in fact, that getting into the class became highly competitive, with about 4 students applying for every available seat. Not because it promised easy answers, but because it dared to take the deepest questions of human life seriously. Here's some of the word on the street from students around campus who had experienced the class firsthand. They said, "It seems everybody has bought into the existing paradigm of success. This is like what the mindset of people at Yale. You go into consulting, you make a lot of money. It's really different to read great text with a sincere desire to answer the great questions of life rather than hunting for an argument just to prove your intellectual prowess." No one at college has ever done that, right? Instead of trying to say something smart, my fellow students were interested in saying something that got the class closer to the truth, which often involved asking a question or just admitting that they weren't sure of something that they thought they had been sure about. It seems a little dramatic to say that the class altered my life, but some days that's how it feels. It opened me to the idea of a life lived with intention. And that's the same invitation many of us feel at the beginning of a new calendar year, to pause, reflect, and ask, what kind of life do I actually want to live? Because whether we realize it or not, many of us arrive in January already exhausted. Is anybody already exhausted on January 4th? I mean, I have a 2-year-old, so holiday just means daycare is closed, so it means parenting. Because whether we realize it or not, many of us arrive at January, we're carrying habits and expectations and assumptions we've rarely had the time and space to fully examine. So when I learned that the professors of this course had published a book based on what they'd learned, making its insights more widely available beyond Yale's campus, I knew it would be a good inspiration for a sermon on the first Sunday of a new year. The book is titled Life Worth Living, A Guide to What Matters Most. And before that sounds too appealing, I should add the warning that the professors offer the students on day 1. This course might wreck your life, right? It might make your parents regret spending all that money to send you to this Ivy League university to go into consulting and to make a lot of money. Because maybe you might decide that's not how you want to spend your life. We could say the same about this book or even this sermon, because history suggests that people who take questions of meaning and purpose seriously rarely stay the same. This tension between comfort and meaning isn't new. It's one of the oldest spiritual stories that we have. Consider a classic example. Before he started his quest to become the Buddha, Siddhartha Gautama was already a prince. He had already arrived, born on third base. heir to a kingdom, born into comfort, privilege, and every form of security the world could offer at that time. But one day, while venturing beyond the palace walls, he unexpectedly stumbled into what are known as the four sights that he had been carefully shielded from since childhood. He encountered an old man, a sick person, a corpse, and a wandering holy ascetic. In those encounters, he came face to face with the fragility of human life and the inescapability of human suffering. And they stirred within him those same perennial questions. 2,500 years ago, they stirred within him the same perennial questions we heard earlier. What really matters? What kind of life am I truly called to live? Taking those questions seriously shattered his contentment with the comfortable world he had always known. Now, there are countless stories of this throughout history of people whose lives were transformed when they committed themselves to the spiritual path, to the work of justice, or to just something larger than their own comfort and ego. Some people might say their lives were wrecked, but from another angle, those same lives might be understood as being reoriented, aligned with a deeper set of values, like those UU values on the back of your order of service, reoriented to a truer sense of purpose, to a fuller understanding of what it means to live well. But that kind of reorientation represents a real paradigm shift. As one student admitted a few weeks into the Life Worth Living course, I really thought there was going to be a lot more in this class about yachts. Which is funny, but also revealing, because it names with surprising candor the story that many of us have absorbed at both the conscious and unconscious level about what success is supposed to look like, right? It looks like a yacht. A yacht symbolizes, it doesn't. That's not the takeaway. But a yacht symbolizes a familiar story that our culture tells us, that the good life is about accumulation, comfort, status, success. It is measurable in visible material terms. Bigger, better, more. It's the idea that if we just acquire enough money, enough recognition or security, then we'll finally arrive at happiness. But the story of the Buddha reminds us that even when all of those boxes are checked, the deepest questions of meaning still insist on being asked within us. There's a common confusion in our culture that the good life, the life worth living, should always feel good. That it's about maximizing pleasure, minimizing pain, and arranging our lives with comfort and ease. But a truly good life, a flourishing life, a deep life, asks much more of us than comfort and ease alone. The good life isn't the life that feels good all the time. It's the life that's good for us and good for the world over the long arc of our lives. To say more about the questions that can help shape such a life, the professors behind the Life Worth Living course offer a framework that's surprisingly simple but profoundly illuminating. Here's one of the many charts from the course that is worth spending some time with. Let's start with that column on the left-hand side. You'll have to kind of turn sideways to read it. At the top, the focus is on action, but as you move downward, the emphasis shifts toward deeper levels of reflection. And that movement of slowing down, diving beneath the surface, taking time to reflect on what truly matters is at the heart of what that Life Worth Living course is all about, what they're trying to cultivate. So let's start at the top of the chart and work our way down. Life can be so busy. It can throw so much at us that it's easy to move through our days on autopilot, just survival mode, guarded largely by habit. And when we're living at this level, there's a lot of action and often very little reflection. Or as the authors put it, when we're in this survival autopilot mode, we do what we do because, I don't know, it's what we do. Like you're just trying to get through your days. Moving deeper to the second line of our chart, there's an old saying that I can guarantee you one thing is true right now. Your life is perfectly designed to get the results that you're getting. Your life is perfectly designed. Now, I can't tell you how exactly to redesign it, but I can tell you, you've designed it perfectly to get the results you're getting. At some point, though, often for reasons we can't fully explain, we begin to feel dissatisfied with the outcomes of a life on autopilot and survival mode. Something just isn't working anymore. And we start to reflect, even if only briefly and imperfectly at first, on how we might be more effective in reaching our goals. We set New Year's resolutions and things like that. I notice at the Y, who are all these people and why is it so crowded? And you'll probably only be here for another 6 weeks, but I'm here year-round. At this level, people often find themselves asking a very practical question, a question of strategy. Is what I am doing getting me what I want? But the chart doesn't stop there. As we move deeper still, we shift more fully from action into reflection. I will never forget the first day of my 3-year spiritual direction program when the coordinator of the program stood before us and said, "We're going to start slowly so that later, maybe, we can slow down." For most of us, that feels truly counterintuitive and countercultural given how we're conditioned to live. Aren't we supposed to start slowly so that later we can speed up and up and up and up? So much in our world urges us to do more, better, faster, produce more and more and more. But this deeper level of self-awareness invites us into something different. It invites us to slow down long enough to wrestle with a far more searching question. What do I really want? What do I really want? And how might that be different from simply being more effective at getting what others have told me I should want, at what billions of dollars in advertising have told me I should allegedly want? This is the level of vision, the place where we begin to examine our values, our longings, our stories that we've been told about what the good life looks like. Vision because we might get a glimpse of how it might be different. It's here that the work becomes both harder and more honest because it asks us not just how we're living, but what we're really living for and why. And then we're invited to dive one level deeper still. Many people live their whole lives without touching into this level of depth. That's why this course at Yale has been so impactful for so many students. They have been spectacularly successful for so much of their early life at achieving according to the standards created by others. Either that or they're a legacy with really rich parents. I don't have time for that right now. We can't have that discussion. Somehow they've ended up at this Ivy League university. But at the level of self-transcendence, we are challenged to ask a far deeper and more subversive question. What is actually worth wanting? What is actually worth wanting? When you hear that question again, can you feel the bottom drop out even a little? Notice what stirs in you. What wants to emerge? What wants to emerge? At some point, reflection carries us beyond the small story of our own preferences and ambitions into what we might dare call something like truth. Not truth in the sense of having one right answer for all people and all times and all places, but truth in the sense of aligning our lives with something larger than ourselves. Values that endure, commitments that give shape to our days, loves that are actually worthy of our devotion. Connecting to something larger in ourselves can take many forms. For some people, it looks like a deep commitment to family or community or service. For others, it's devotion to justice, compassion, or healing the world. For some, it's grounded in a spiritual practice. For others, in love, creativity, art, or the care for future generations. But even after we reach that depth of self-transcendence, the chart doesn't leave us there. The movement curves upward again, back into action, but now a very different type of action. Action no longer driven by default expectations, but shaped by the clarity of what truly matters. From connecting to a truth larger than ourselves emerges a clearer sense of vision, grounded not in what others expect or try to impose upon us, but in what we most deeply and most authentically care about, what we're called to do. From that vision, we can begin to discern an effective strategy, and from that strategy grows the daily habits that quietly and steadily shape how we actually live. So let me move toward my conclusion by sharing how the professors themselves bring the course to an end, by inviting students to keep living into the questions, asking again and again these deepest questions. Is what I am doing getting me what I want? And what do I really want? And what is actually worth wanting? And in the end, they offer a simple and powerful charge, one that feels especially fitting as we begin a new year. Live for what matters most. Your one wild and precious life is worth it. And that choice, what we will give our lives to, begins again today in this new year. And as we prepare to go into the rest of this day and the week and year to come, may you continue your journey with love at the center. Care for one another, care for this one earth, do justice and make peace. And as you go, whatever taste or touch or glimpse you've had of even a little more hope or love or peace or joy, that goes with you out into the world. We're different for having spent this time together. And even in this hard time, continue to look for and savor all that still remains good and true and beautiful. May you live boldly. May you live with thanksgiving.